I'm Claire Edwards. I created the Australian Marimba Composition Kit in 2021 to help emerging as well as established composers worldwide understand better how to write for this instrument, the 5-octave marimba. Marimba music is written on 2 staves, just like the piano, but unlike the piano, we only have the equivalent of 4 fingers when we're playing the marimba, which means that when you're writing for marimba, actually it's a pretty different prospect to writing for the piano. That said, I do recommend using the piano at home to check when you're writing for marimba. You just use your 1st and 5th finger on the piano, which is the equivalent of our 2 mallets. And this way, you can check the playability of your piece on the piano. Our potential span on the marimba is actually a little bit wider than on the piano, but this way it gives you a really good idea of whether or not the marimba player is going to be able to play your piece. It can particularly help as well with potentially showing the different angles that the marimba player is going to have to make to play minor and major thirds especially, like this. And now, a quick overview of the main marimba techniques that we tend to use on the marimba, and using these will create really idiomatic writing for the marimba. Single independent strokes, alternating strokes, which can be used on a whole manner of varying intervals. I'm going to play them on a 5th. Also double vertical strokes, which is literally just playing up and down with the 2 mallets. We can also, of course, change the intervals between double vertical strokes, for example, from an octave to a 5th to a 3rd. And then mixed strokes, which is my favourite. Repeated patterns are particularly effective on the marimba, and just like on the guitar or harp, you can change the permutations of chords to change the musical result. Try not to constantly change the patterns, permutations, and interval, as this can get really finicky on the marimba. This excerpt from Anne Cause's piece, Fancy and Flight, is a really good example of how changing a permutation of a chord can alter the musical result. As you can see, the 5-octave marimba is a really big instrument, with the width of the bars changing quite markedly from the low register, you can see here, to the high register. And in the high register, the bar width is much more like a xylophone. Interval changing is controlled on the marimba by stretching and contracting the distance between the 2 mallets in your hand. Big interval changes and big registral changes are definitely possible, but time is needed in the form of rests between these changes. 2 good examples are from The Beginning of More Marimba Dances by Ross Edwards. So you can see that there I'm having to span more than 2 octaves of the range of the marimba, but it's definitely possible because both hands can be preset. In Reflections on the Nature of Water by Jacob Druckmann, he does a similar thing where he uses a big interval and then coming into a small interval, but he has rests between the chords. In my marimba composition kit, I introduce the anchor concept. The idea of this is that if you retain one element, whether it be repeated notes, parallel intervals, or retaining a single anchor note at the top or bottom of a chord, it's a really good rule of thumb for making sure that your piece for marimba will be playable. This is a good example from Ella Mason's piece Verve, where she retains the A at the top of the chord. Another good example is in Elena Katz-Chernon's piece Violet's Etude, where she retains the same interval in the right hand, but the left hand is constantly changing. So now for some do's and don'ts on the marimba. We tend to use 4 mallets most when we're playing the 5-octave marimba, especially as a solo instrument. We can of course also use 2 mallets, just like a xylophone. The marimba is really long, so it's helpful if you try to always retain about an octave between both hands. We can obviously reach higher and lower than an octave, but to do this in an ongoing way is actually quite uncomfortable. Another pointer that I feel quite strongly about is that you shouldn't write for a 5-octave marimba unless you're really going to utilize the really beautiful low register of the marimba. Of course, marimbas exist in 4 octaves, 4 1/3, also 4 1/2. So if you're going to use a 5-octave marimba, don't just include a couple of notes below the low F. As you'll see, when I've been playing these examples today, I've been using these medium mallets, and they're really good for the whole range of the instrument. But what you'll find is that if you're focusing a lot on, say, the top register and then suddenly a lot on the low register, it's going to be really hard to find mallets that work well for the whole register of the marimba. Remember as well, it is of course possible for us to change our sticks, but if we do that, we need time. So we can't just change sticks with 1 beat rest. This is how long it takes to change sticks. Another thing we do on marimba is use a graduated set of mallets, and this means that we can actually play all over the whole range of the instrument quite well. We tend to have a harder one on the top, medium in the middle, and a softer one on the bottom. And this way we can really articulate up high and down low. We have a really beautiful full tone. When it comes to melody and accompaniment, don't be tempted, as is possible on piano, to put a really tricky melody in the right hand and an accompaniment in the left hand. Generally speaking, on the marimba, while we can accompany ourselves with one hand, with a single-handed roll, for example, you'll do better to integrate the melody and the accompaniment so that they're not separate lines. Rolling is how we play long notes on the marimba. It can be used particularly effectively in chorale-style material, where we roll between the hands to play phrases in a chordal motion. We can also do a little bit of an extended technique where we roll around the end of a bar to create a sort of fluttering effect, which is used in Maria Grenfell's piece, Stings and Wings. Although articulation changes on the marimba can often seem quite subtle, it's really important that composers are very specific with articulation markings, dynamics, and phrase marks in their marimba writing. Another technique that we can employ is a dead stroke, which is when we actually push into the bar to make a very short sound with no resonance. Dead strokes are denoted with a D.S. or a cross above the note, and I find they're a really effective way of getting more extreme articulation on the marimba. Unlike on the vibraphone, there aren't many extended techniques that are possible on the marimba, but a couple of my favourites are using shafts on the edges of the bars, Just remember, when you're writing this way, you can't combine black and white notes in the one hand. Another really great effect is to bow the bottom register of the marimba. Likewise, you have to be really aware of the time that it takes to move a very long bow from one side of the marimba to the other. Finally, in relation to stick choice as well as sticking, it's my view that you as the composer don't really need to worry about sticking, because us, the performers, can sort that out for ourselves, as long as you use the thumb and pinky checking technique on the piano. So have fun writing for the marimba, and don't forget that you can download the Australian Marimba Composition Kit from my website, claireedwards.com, for lots more details and examples on how to write for the 5-octave marimba. Good luck!